Welcome, everyone. Good to see folks. We're going to give it a few minutes as usual to give folks time to find their link and get online. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our November webinar. I see lots of familiar names and some new names. Welcome, everyone. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. We're going to give folks another minute or two to find their way in. I see some friends on here. Hi, Heather. Hi, Francis. Hi, Chloe. Feel like romper room. I see Aaron in the audience. It's nice to have you here. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Mitch Wasserman, great to see you. We worked together at Purple Carrot for years. Wow, what a funny place to come across each other. Hello, Mitch. Let's catch up offline, man.
I see some new names. Always fun to see new people. Find us and find the webinar series. As you come in, I would love it if you would drop your name and your organization and maybe where you're operating into the chat so folks can see who else is here, who else maybe from around them is online. See some folks that I've met recently at ReFed. I guess that wasn't that recently. Wow, this year both flew and took about 1,000 years to happen.
Looking forward to the next ReFed event, though. Seattle, like we were just talking about, be great.
It'll be nice to see folks in Seattle this year for ReFed. Matt and I were just talking about how both our organizations will be there.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll give it about one more minute. I still see folks coming in at a little bit of a clip. Ooh, that chat is flying by. Lots of folks saying hi. All right, why don't we go to the next slide, Matt?
Yeah.
So this webinar is being recorded. Is it being? Yes, it is being recorded. So just FYI, you should know that. That also means you can watch it later. If you miss something and want to go back and check on it or have to hop off early, drop your questions into the Q&A, not into the chat. As you can see, the chat is just zooming by. If you put it in the chat, there's a chance we won't see it. If you want to make sure that we're able to get to your question and answer it, please put it into the Q&A. We will get to those questions at the end. At the end of the webinar, we will also provide links for requests with a follow-up meeting. Actually, Matt, you'll want to drop in your email as well in case you want a follow-up meeting with Matt, if you want a follow-up meeting with Food Rescue Hero, as well as a sign-up link for the next webinar. And with that, next slide. I am excited to introduce Matt Jones from Brightly. We've been working with Matt Jones here at Food Rescue Hero for a little bit now, and we've really found his insight and expertise on carbon credits really invaluable. It's something I know I first heard about at ReFed a couple years ago and was kind of interested in it, but kind of nervous about it. And so was so excited to talk to Matt and get some one-on-one time to really dig in and understand. And so I thought it would be great to have him talk to our audience. Before that, I see Carol Bauer, you raised your hand. If you want to go ahead, you can either drop me a DM in the chat or just ask the question in the general chat, and I will help you out. Matt, over to you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate this opportunity. And Matt Jones, Director of Partnerships at Brightly. Just a quick little background. Have dedicated my career to working in the sustainable food industry, from farm animal welfare policy to plant-based meal kit companies like Purple Carrot with Mitch, wholesale distribution, and now getting to address food waste and food insecurity. So I'm really excited to be here. Just a quick little background on Brightly before we get into what we do. I think it's relevant to know where Brightly's coming from. So actually, when Mitch and I were at Purple Carrot, every year Purple Carrot would work with nonprofits in the food space. And one year, the CEO and founder of Purple Carrot, his name's Andy Levitt, and he's also the CEO and founder of Brightly. He was doing some consulting work with the FarmLink project out of California, and specifically consulting on whether there were tax credits or carbon credits that they could benefit from as an organization. And they saw the opportunity that was coming down the pipeline, which is what we're going to discuss today. And they together decided that the opportunity was too fruitful for only one organization to really start working on this. And so they both decided that this should become its own company and become available to the full food rescue industry. And that is what Brightly is and where we're coming from. Also, I want to thank Food Rescue Hero for, one, this opportunity, but two, you have been such innovative and strategic thinkers in how we format this partnership and drive change in the food rescue industry. It's a new opportunity. You came at it with new ideas on how to structure all of this. So thank you to you all. This has been a really cool, insightful experience. And I'll dig into a bit Food Rescue Hero's role and how exactly we're partnering to generate carbon credits. But first, we're going to dig into what exactly carbon credits and carbon revenue is. So we at Brightly, we strongly believe that the environmental impact of food rescue organizations is misunderstood and highly, highly undervalued. Everybody knows that a food bank addresses food insecurity, right? This is a part of every community, unfortunately, in the US, but very few people, including food rescue organizations' own employees and boards and donors, actually understand the true environmental impact that food rescue organizations have through their day-to-day operations. And we now have an opportunity to change that narrative, and it starts with quantification of the environmental impact of food rescue organizations' works. And I'm going to start, instead of saying food rescue organization 100 times, I'm going to say FRO, just to make things a little bit easier. But it starts with quantifying the environmental impact of an FRO, and then through that quantification, we are able to generate a sustainable revenue stream now for you all. And we are doing so through a market-driven approach, and this is specifically through the voluntary carbon market. And by doing so, we are, one, understanding, and then two, commodifying your environmental attributes as an organization. And, the hopes is that this carbon revenue can alleviate an FRO's annual fundraising needs, drive FRO growth, keep more food from a landfill, and feed more people. And we strongly believe that FROs are at a very unique intersection to address both food waste and food insecurity because of where they lie in the supply chain. And by understanding their role in the environment better, we're now able to harness corporate dollars through the voluntary carbon market and create a sustainable, reliable revenue stream for food rescue organizations. We all know this. I'm sure everybody on this call, our food system is broken. The data could not be clearer. Here within the US, 40% of food goes to the landfill. And I was actually just at a sustainability conference in Canada, where they were stating that 60% of their food goes to landfill. I'm sure 40% probably underlies what the actual issue is. It's conservative, but 40% of food goes to landfill. This food decomposes and emits methane. Every food is made up of a wet and dry matter content. The USDA assigns a wet and dry matter content to every food item. And it's the dry matter content of that food that actually converts into methane when it's decomposing in a landfill. And methane is 80 times more potent to our atmosphere than CO2, and also accounts for 6% of all US-based emissions. And this kind of insurmountable mountain of food waste is occurring while so many of us and so many of our neighbors go hungry and don't know where their next nutritious meal is coming from. And this is something you all understand. You are experts in the space. I don't need to sit here and tell you about food insecurity. But I will say, actually jumping back to ReFed, at last year's ReFed, their president, Dana Gunders, on the main stage in front of everybody, said that the fact that we have so much surplus food and so many people going hungry, and the fact that that surplus food ends up becoming predominantly waste and not fed to those is quite literally the dumbest issue that we have as a country. And I think the way that she put it is simple and beautiful because it's just dumb. But through the voluntary carbon market, through Vera, the registry that we're utilizing, we have a unique opportunity now to address food waste and food insecurity. So this is where we get to the fun part. Let's start talking about the opportunity, the money that can come with it, and voluntary carbon markets and Vera all together. So what exactly is a carbon credit? It's a tradable certificate representing the avoidance or the removal of 1 metric ton of CO2 or its equivalent greenhouse gas from entering the atmosphere or from already existing in the atmosphere. We are working with methane because that's what the food is decomposing, but that is what a carbon credit represents and is. And to generate one, there needs to be an emission reduction effort of some type somewhere that's responsible for the avoidance or removal of 1 metric ton of carbon from the atmosphere. So through a methodology and a rigorous third-party auditing process, those emission reduction efforts and their associated data, those can actually be converted into a carbon credit. And a corporation can purchase these and offset its carbon footprint. And when they do purchase one, they offset their carbon footprint by 1 metric ton of carbon. And there are many different types of efforts that can result in a carbon credit. I think maybe around 170. Please do not quote me on that. But solar, wind, sustainable ag, hydropower, all of these, there are methodologies to generate carbon credits from those types of products. But in our collective case today, what we're discussing is how food rescue is generated and turned into carbon credits. So to conceptualize what a carbon credit means with us today, it represents 1 metric ton of CO2 that was avoided from entering the atmosphere because food rescue organizations stepped in, prevented that food from going to a landfill where it will emit methane. And that food was, very importantly, according to the methodology, kept within the human supply chain. And that is a necessary piece. And so in order to create a trusted carbon credit, there needs to be an accredited methodology so companies feel safe purchasing them and that they accurately represent an environmental impact that they're claiming to have. We, Brightly, is utilizing a methodology generated by Vera. Vera is the world's leading nonprofit carbon credit registry. And last year they developed their VMOO46, or their avoided food loss and waste methodology. And this is the first methodology from an accredited registry that allows for the generation of carbon credits from avoided food loss and waste. So this is an extremely new opportunity. The voluntary carbon market's been around, but to do so for what we're talking about today has only been available since last July. So we, a carbon credit project developer, we've submitted our almost 100-page project to Verra that will allow us to use this methodology to generate carbon credits from avoided food loss and waste. And we are the only carbon credit project developer that is utilizing this methodology to generate carbon revenue on behalf of food rescue organizations. And this is, again, in an effort to create a sustainable revenue stream for and even from your existing operations. So that's a little bit on what a carbon credit is, and how they're generated through a methodology and an accredited registry. So here's what this looks like actually in practice. If we were to partner with your food rescue organization, what we would do is you would provide your food rescue data. We then ingest it into a software that we've developed over years that can make sense of any food bank data set and provides an output once we ingest it of an environmental metrics, one of which is avoided methane emissions. We then take that data, go through a rigorous third-party auditing process with third-party VVBs, which are our validation and verification bodies, and then also an additional round of auditing with Verra. And once both parties have approved our representation of the environmental impact of your food rescue efforts, those efforts are then turned into carbon credits or minted, which is a term that the voluntary carbon market use. When a carbon credit is actually created, it's minted. And then when they are minted, they can be purchased and retired to offset a company's carbon footprint. And that is once we sell them, and that is when we return the vast majority of the revenue back to our food rescue partners. And it doesn't take much. We need, at a minimum, we need 4 data points from a food bank to generate carbon credits: the date of the donation, the donor name, food type description, and the volume of the pounds. We do request a number of other data points, and it helps us build a baseline emission for your organization, but our software has allowed us to do this with only 4 data points. It's important to know that not all credits are created equally, and it wouldn't take long for any of you to do some research on the voluntary carbon market, carbon credits, even the registry we're using, Verra. There are negative articles out there, and for the most part, they are highlighting greenwashed carbon credits, where the environmental impact is overstated within the carbon credit. The environmental impact is less than it's stating. And in that scenario, that means companies are selling and buying those carbon credits. Companies are making sustainability claims off of those carbon credits, but the environmental impact isn't actually there. And I want to be very, very clear here that Brightly takes every step possible to make sure that our FRO partners, our corporate buyers, and us as well as a carbon credit project developer, we are never in potential even risk of being considered greenwashing, because we take as conservative of an approach in our calculations as possible. Every step of our calculation and every assumption we have to make, if the full data set's not there, we go conservative. And in the world of the voluntary carbon market, that means we're high integrity. Again, so we take a conservative approach. But when you actually look at what a carbon credit or a carbon credit buyer or corporation is interested in, we also offer a very local, hyper-local impact when a corporation does purchase our carbon credits, because the money is going to a food rescue organization, and we are partnered with food rescue organizations in every county throughout the US. When a company purchases a Brightly carbon credit, there is a hyper-local impact. And that's kind of in contrast to what we're hearing from buyers in the voluntary carbon market, that so many offsets that are currently available are predominantly from international projects, or a lot of them are. And there's really good great international projects, reforestation projects in Asia, cook stove conversion projects in Africa, all very important for supporting those communities and for curbing global emissions. But what we have found is that there is a severe appetite for hyper local impact. Corporations want to feel connected to what the project that they're investing in, and that would be you all as food rescue organizations. And also, when a corporation purchases our carbon credit, they are helping to address food insecurity. And so when you look at the combination of what we offer, our conservative, high integrity approach to our calculations, our hyper-local domestic impact, and the social co-benefit of addressing food insecurity, it is going to allow us to charge for a premium for these carbon credits in the voluntary carbon market. And that is exactly how we maximize the carbon revenue that we remit back to our food rescue partners. We have built something of quality. Corporations are starting to notice that, and there is a shortage of that in the voluntary carbon market. Additionally, there is, outside of the carbon revenue, I believe that there's a really strong value to this partnership for a food rescue organization. So we've already submitted our first cohort of food banks and their associated data to Vera. We're building our second cohort right now. And what we have found is that those FROs in the first cohort, now that we have a really solid understanding of the environmental metrics and carbon revenue associated with their data, we've started building customized and branded materials for them, which we will do for every FRO that we work with. And in that, we're highlighting the environmental impact of their work. And what we're hearing back from them is that their internal team, their board, their donors are very interested in getting a better understanding of the environmental impact of their work. So much so that we are starting to find that the existing donors, whether it be food or financial donors of our FRO partners, are potentially very likely to become the most common buyers of Brightly carbon credits. And excitingly, this offers our FRO partners an ability to engage their donors in a way that did not exist before. When a donor purchases a Brightly carbon credit, they're not only getting to offset their carbon footprint, but they are investing directly into that, like that food bank, and also all US-based food rescue operations. And so I think the potential soft value here outside of the hard carbon revenue, the ability for an FRO to be able to tap into that donor base in a new way that didn't exist before, I think we don't even understand the potential opportunities that will come up from that. Very, very excited about that. So taking a look at the demand side, the supply side are our FRO partnerships and their data. That's how we generate the carbon credits. The demand side being the corporate buyers of these carbon credits. I want to start with an important question that I get asked a lot from our FRO partners. And Jen, you also asked this, and it's a good question. Why should a company be able to buy a carbon offset or carbon credit and offset their carbon footprint for work that they're not doing? And it's valid. And this kind of gets to the heart of the voluntary carbon market and why it exists. And so I just want to kind of touch on that real quick. So the voluntary carbon market, it brings businesses and their money into the equation of driving emission reduction efforts worldwide. And in a way, it acts as a very efficient money transfer mechanism. So we have companies who have sustainability goals, are having issues and challenges reaching those sustainability goals, yet they have money. And what the voluntary carbon market allows them to do is purchase carbon credits that directly invest in emission reduction projects that are generally lacking funding to continue their emission reduction efforts. And the voluntary carbon market, it was specifically intended to drive corporate investment in the global south, where these emission reduction efforts and funds are often needed the most. And when I talk about voluntary carbon market, really what this is, it's a combination of exchanges and brokers and over-the-counter sales of carbon credits. Just want to kind of clarify what that is. And this is in contrast with a compliance or a regulatory carbon market, where governments can offer an approved set of carbon credits for companies to purchase so that they can adhere to state-level emission regulations. This has nothing to do with the government. This is completely voluntary. Public goals from sustainability companies that are driven to make these sustainability claims, whether it be their CEOs or their board members or their consumers are demanding them to become more sustainable, they are choosing to come to the voluntary carbon market. They're not required by any government agencies. And as of now, half of Fortune 500 companies, half of 2000 Russell companies, they have publicly stated sustainability goals. And oftentimes those are wanting to reduce emissions by a certain percent by a certain year. And while this is great that companies are starting to publicly come out with these goals, there's an organization called VCMI, Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. They are a leading research organization on the voluntary carbon market. They do awesome work. They've come out with some reports that show that 93% of these companies will not be able to reach their emission reduction targets internally, through cleaner fuel in their trucks, cleaner refrigerants, solar, within their own supply chain. And it's often because the cost of decarbonization is too high, supply chain engagement is very difficult to do, and or the emission reduction technologies are not at the scale that they need them to be. And so what that leaves these companies with is if 9 out of 10 are not going to be able to reach these goals, they're left with reneging on that public goal, which they don't want to do for obvious PR reasons, or they can turn to the voluntary carbon market to offset these emissions in the near term that they couldn't do so internally. And we expect these companies to turn to the voluntary carbon market, but so do the big consulting firms. Bain came out with some numbers that the voluntary carbon market was valued at $2 billion in 2023, or just north of it. By 2030, they are estimating the voluntary carbon market to be valued at $40 billion. And so, for previously stated reasons, as we near these dates when companies said they would have reduced their emissions by a certain amount by, and they're struggling to do so. A lot of those dates are 2025, 2030, kind of in clean increments. We expect the demand for high integrity carbon credits to far outstrip the supply. Because Brightly credits are conservative in our calculations, domestic in its impact, and the social co-benefit of addressing food insecurity. Again, this is why we believe we are going to be able to charge a premium and are already charging a premium for these credits as more companies come to the voluntary carbon market. And that's how we're going to maximize the carbon revenue that we remit to our FRO partners. The food rescue industry, though, it's a necessary piece to addressing both food waste and food insecurity. And with so many FROs competing for grants and donations just to feed those at their doors, it's time we start utilizing corporate dollars to generate sustainable revenue streams. Thanks to Food Rescue Hero for, again, working on this partnership with us. As a Food Rescue Hero member, for example, you are now able to access carbon revenue, and they are going to consolidate and share your food rescue data with Brightly. Oftentimes the data gathering is the most challenging, is the most difficult thing for an FRO to do, to take advantage of our free services and partnerships. So Food Rescue Hero taking that away from its members, taking that need to gather that data and share it with Brightly on their behalf. It's a really valuable partnership. So just want to thank you all for that again. And our hope is that, carbon revenue generated from this partnership and work with any of you all independently, it's going to drive change in each individual organization. Hopefully it drives impactful change for the Food Rescue Hero app and software, because as that grows, that means the world is cleaner and better fed. And we can get into what is required to take part in that. But essentially, we need a contract, we need your food rescue data, and a short intake form that helps us build your emission baseline. And then Brightly takes care of the rest. With your data, we ingest it, we work through the auditing process, the sales process, and then once we sell, we remit the revenue back to you. And just for everybody's knowledge, the initial ingestion of food rescue data that we're requesting is 2021 to 2023 food rescue data, because at this time we are allowed to credit historical food rescue efforts. There's a look back period built into the methodology. But once this initial ingestion is done, in early 2025, when your 2024 data is finalized and audited, you share that, you know what format and what data we're looking for. So it's a one time a year data share back to us. We then go through the work and remit the revenue. We are really trying to make this as seamless of a process as possible for FROs to access carbon revenue. And our software is what allows for that, which is exciting. If anybody has any questions, please reach out. And actually, I'm happy to answer it. If you want to go look through the Q&A, I'm also happy to answer them here. But here's my email. And I would be happy to talk with any and all of you, even if it's just information gathering. I love these conversations. It's my job, so I'm here to do that. And Jen, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah. So we have lots of questions. Before we get to the questions, just a quick announcement. And at the end of the webinar, I will drop in links to this. Our next webinar is December 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And it will be looking at the 2024 food recovery trends and then talking about how we can take those trends and plan for 2025 based on what we see coming up. So Matt, we've got lots of questions, lots of good ones.
I just pulled up the Q&A. Do you want me to start kind of?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Cool. So Susan, how detailed does the description of the food recovered need to be? Really good question. It can be vague, like high level categories, or it can be specific, like Apple. So let's use the example of an organization rescuing 100 pounds of apples. We can make environmental sense of apple and produce being the food type description. But what happens when we have a vague description like produce is Brightly then takes it upon ourselves to make sure that we are not overestimating the environmental impact of that food rescue effort. We don't know what this food type is. We need to assign a dry matter content to this food rescue effort. If we just know that it's produce and not an apple, what we've chosen to do is use the emission rate from the produce item with the lowest dry matter content, which would be watermelon. So that full food rescue effort gets the watermelon-based avoided methane emissions. And so, again, we can work with all types of explanations, but what this actually offers is, for the first time in the food rescue industry, there is now an ROI on better data practices. And what we view as a partnership opportunity is, once we've initially ingested your data, that initial set, as we continue through further ingestions, we're going to have a very good sense of your donor base, your food types, your categories, the dry matter contents, all of that. And so we want to work with you to find specific instances within your pickups. Maybe it's this donor or that donor, where it's easier to start providing more granular food type descriptions. Because if you do, here's the additional carbon revenue that we could generate on your behalf. And so I think it's awesome that for the first time, there's an ROI for better data practices in the food rescue space. If the current carbon credits are brought by current donors, couldn't that lead to Brightly offering cannibalizing donation streams? Okay. So, well, there's actually kind of a point I want to touch on real quick. Some companies do use their donations to actually offset their carbon footprint. In this scenario, it is important that a food rescue organization has the environmental ownership of the avoided food loss and waste, so that the company cannot reduce their carbon footprint with the donation, but also reduce their carbon footprint with the purchase of the carbon credit. So just real quick, that's one way we avoid double counting, and our system is very good at it. But would it be cannibalizing their donation streams? Jen, is that potentially insinuating that because they're donating, they're getting to purchase the carbon credits back, and they don't want to purchase the carbon credits, so they try to donate less? I'm not quite sure I understand.
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what.
Okay.
I guess
I'm sorry, Susan, but if you want to email me, let's have that conversation. I don't want to say anything incorrect. Food rescue is going on without carbon credits, so the model you are discussing is not encouraging anything new to reduce emissions. That used to be a value-related concern to carbon credits. It's a good question. And this actually, what you're questioning is what's called additionality in the voluntary carbon market. In order for a carbon credit to be generated, you need to be able to prove additionality. And additionality is saying that without this carbon revenue, the recipient of the carbon revenue would have difficulty continuing or expanding their work, the emission reduction effort. And so Brightly's additionality argument is that since COVID, and this is why we're going back certain years, but not before COVID in what we can credit. Since COVID, the food rescue space has changed so dramatically and so quickly in volunteer-based donations, pricing of food, so on and so forth. The list goes on, that with over 50% of food banks currently in the red financially, this is an unsustainable business model at the moment for many food rescue organizations. Food and carbon revenue is going to help them and bring that 50% in the financial red down to hopefully a much smaller number. So to answer the question, we do need to prove additionality. And that's exactly what's kind of getting to your concern. And, in order to prove additionality, we have to make a lot of concessions. We make a lot of conservative assumptions, and it's going to be Vera, the registry. It's going to be their decision on whether they think this is an additional project or not. So, well, we believe there's an additionality argument there. Vera also has a say on that. But that's kind of that answer to your question.
Yeah, and I think something that you had said to me when I asked this question, because I've been super skeptical because I am really cognizant of the fact that our part of our value is that we're providing, this really big environmental impact, is that these companies are oftentimes 90% of the way to hitting their goals, and they're not able to get there. So they're already doing all this environmental work. What this does, it allows them to hit those goals that they've set and support the food recovery organization. So they weren't going to get there anyway. It's not like they're suddenly they're free to pollute and they're saying, oh, we bought carbon credits, we're going to go ahead and spew some more methane because we bought this carbon credit. It's that they've tried and they just can't cut anymore. And so this is them get to the goal. Yeah.
Good point, Jen. Actually, there's really good data out there, again, from VCMI. Look them up if you haven't. That companies who are purchasing carbon offsets are twice as likely and twice as far in their internal emission reduction efforts as those who are not purchasing carbon offsets. So again, with 9 out of 10 companies not being able to reach their internal sustainability goals, they have the option to do nothing and fail to meet those goals, or turn to the voluntary carbon market and invest in emission reduction efforts. And there's science showing that if they do, they are also more likely to be doing internal work as well. And so, a lot of people have a lot of really valid concerns with the voluntary carbon market. The way we view it isn't just internal emission reduction efforts. It's not that or turning to offsets. It can be a combination of both. And realistically, companies are going to need to turn to both if we're actually going to hit our global emission reduction goals. Okay. What is Matt's take on the new federal administration and whether that might diminish interest in ESG carbon neutrality goals? That's a really good question, because last week when I was in Canada, their government actually just passed a new emission reporting regulation, and it's far more advanced than here in the US, as you can probably assume. But it is what we are hearing from these companies and these sustainability experts in Canada is that, yes, these stricter regulations around reporting and emission reduction efforts is having kind of an adverse effect on companies in Canada, in that there are fewer companies coming out with sustainability goals. I think that is just a natural reaction. I'm not sure what there is to do about that, but companies are concerned that if regulations are more stringent and therefore the penalties of missing those regulations are as well, I think we can safely assume that their companies are going to be more hesitant to come out with public sustainability goals. But I do not believe that that is going to prevent companies and CEOs and boards and consumers from demanding more sustainability practices from companies. In fact, I think if companies see that the federal government is resistant or taking away sustainability regulations and policies, I actually think we're going to see companies start to take this work under their own wings and do it without government regulations. Consumers are demanding it. The writing is on the wall. You need to be greener. You need to have a cleaner message. You need to have a cleaner company. I mean, and at the end of the day, companies are really answering to consumers more so than government regulation. Is it correct that if a corporate buyer purchases FRO credits, then the FRO themselves cannot claim their CO2 reductions themselves? So the FRO is the owner in the eyes of the voluntary carbon market. There needs to be an owner of the environmental reduction effort or the emission reduction effort. No, the FRO is the owner of the emission reduction effort in this case. There is actually there's a carbon credit project developer that's trying to use this methodology and generate carbon revenue for the donors, the retailers. We believe that the additionality argument and the actual food rescue effort and keeping it within the human supply chain, that environmental ownership is completely on the hands of the FRO. So the answer is no. You are technically, in the eyes of the voluntary carbon market, responsible for the emission reduction effort.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add that according to ReFed, is it 92%? If I have that number wrong, somebody can drop the correct one in the chat. But of the environmental impact of wasted food is actually upstream. It's on having to reproduce that food to feed it to somebody. So not only is it reducing that methane created in the waste stream, which is what the carbon credits is about, but it's also about reducing that upstream for food rescue organizations.
Okay, Susan. So the true costs of conducting food recovery are notoriously elusive. Lack of data, reliance on volunteers. Totally. We see that all the time, by the way. You would be amazed in the variance in quality and granularity of data. It hasn't, well, and I know I haven't finished the rest of the question, but I will say it's, good data practices have not been the priority of food rescue organizations because feeding people is, rightfully so. But now we have an opportunity to generate an ROI for better data practices. Again, I'm super excited about that. But how does food recovery compare cost-wise against carbon reduction activities? They're one and the same in this scenario, actually. The food recovery activity is the emission reduction effort. It is your food recovery action that is preventing what would be normally wasted food from entering the landfill, emitting methane, and you are responsible through your distribution models for keeping that in. So and when you really think about it, like we are going to be crediting your day-to-day operations. And so actually in this scenario, the emission reduction effort and your food recovery effort, those are the same thing, and that's what we're crediting. Sorry if I didn't answer that but properly, but feel free to reach out with me an email. We can hop on a call. The return. What kind of money is in it? Now we're talking. Okay. Yeah. Oh, anonymous. So
I asked it too. Don't be embarrassed to ask.
Everybody asks it.
No,
What are
what
we
is it
talking
for?
here? Yeah, what are we talking about if it isn't a potential investment? If it isn't some financial support, that's what we're doing. It varies. So like I was describing earlier, like even the level of granularity of data will impact the dry matter content that we use in your calculations, which impacts the number of carbon credits that we can generate per pound of food rescued. So it's the carbon revenue that's going to be coming back to each FRO is going to actually vary quite a bit. Sometimes the difference in carbon credits we can generate per pound of food rescued has a difference of like 5 to 15x, depending on the quality of the data. So with that said, the conservative estimate, and I mean conservative, the conservative carbon revenue estimate that I like to tell food rescue organizations is that And it's conservative, assuming a low sale price of our carbon credits and low levels of granularity in your data. Those are the two conservative assumptions I'm making in this carbon revenue estimate. But you can kind of assume anywhere between $2,000 to $2,500 per million pounds of food rescued. I would use that as a leading figure. If the revenue from carbon credits are one-time revenue or recurring. So we are going to ingest your data. Initially, it's going to be historical, and then moving forward, it's going to be year by year by year. And so as long as our contract or partnership is going, you're going to be able to access carbon revenue. And from Vera, we have 7 years to do this before we have to kind of reapprove with Vera to become a carbon credit project developer. So for at least the next 7 years, we can do this together. Is there a minimum pounds per month per year of food recovery that Brightly requires? I want to be fully transparent here. Our costs to do what we do, to get our projects audited, to get Vera to approve, there are quite a few and large costs that we have to take. And frankly, there is a level of volume of food rescue per year for an FRO, where if we were to partner with that FRO independently, we would be losing money. And it kind of starts around, if you're rescuing less than 1 million pounds per year, we would be losing money by working with you. But I want to say this, even if you are, I want to talk with you. We got into this to support food rescue organizations of every size, not just the 150 million pound FROs. And so we are working with Vera to try and figure out a way where we can work with organizations of that size, but also Food Rescue Hero. They are consolidating all of the data and sharing it on their members' behalf. And so we are working with Food Rescue Data to credit their full membership. And so
I was just going to jump in and say that's one of the reasons why we were interested in doing this for our partners, is that we know some of them aren't big enough to submit their own data, and we are able to aggregate it. And I mean, theoretically, there's no reason why a couple of food recovery organizations couldn't get together and do the same thing independently. Correct, Matt?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't want to put a number here because I don't want to restrain any conversations. I want to have that conversation with you. So, but yes, there is a limit where there is a minimum where we're actually losing money as a company. Thanks for the question, Susan. What's a typical timeline on verification from data upload to carbon revenue? So we're in the final stages of getting that first cohort submitted and approved. We've had our project within Vera for almost 1.5 years. It's a incredibly arduous, detailed, scientifically driven process. And so this has taken 1.5 years because not only is Vera approving our project as a carbon credit project developer, but they're also approving the data within the first cohort. But once Vera approves our project, aside from the individual cohorts of food banks, then their approval of the data within each FRO cohort is going to be so much faster. So this second cohort that we're building right now, we are planning to have the data submitted and approved to Vera by next July. And we're asking for the data for this cohort by end of the year. And the reason we're trying to get this data into Vera approved by next July is because there is this look back period that allows us to credit historical food rescue efforts. Next July is the 2nd anniversary of this methodology, and that's when the look back period starts to narrow year by year. So we are making sure that we maximize the carbon revenue we're remitting to our FRO partners in this cohort by getting this data into Vera. It's hard to say the exact timeline because it's taken so long to work through this initial process, but it's going to be an annual submission in return. Can an FRO issue a carbon credit, or do we need a credit? You can absolutely take your data and submit a project to Vera and work with the auditors. You can build your own. Absolutely, you can build your own carbon credits. what that would requires for you to, as a carbon credit project developer, is work through the PDD process with Vera, work through the VVB process with auditors. And you would also need a tool or an engine like our software to calculate the avoided methane emissions according to the methodology. How do we account for double counting? So we partner with Feeding America. We partner with the largest independents in the country. We partner with Food Rescue Hero and their membership. We know that a lot of food banks work together on the same shared food rescue effort. We already see it in our data. We have developed our software to flag all accounts of shared food rescue efforts within our partners, within our FRO partner base. In the scenarios where two FROs are working on the same food rescue effort, we've made the decision to not try and decipher who's more responsible, whose trucks, money, this or that. If there's two organizations, each of them is going to get 50% of the carbon revenue for that shared food rescue effort, hands down. It's just the most equitable solution that we could come up with. So yeah, it's just getting into the gray when you start determining who had more of a say in each individual food rescue effort. So knowing that the next, hi Heather, good to see you. Knowing that the next cohort of data will be submitted in July of 25, when could it reasonably be expected for the credits to get onto the market and begin generating revenue? Very good question. So for there's two separate things here, and I want to make sure we separate them. There's the credits getting minted, and then there's the actual like sale revenue. We're actually able to pre-sell our carbon credits. We haven't minted a carbon credit yet with Vera, yet we have already sold credits to PopSockets and HelloFresh and are in discussions with many of the major retailers and food companies today, right now already. So we are actually able to pre-sell. But knowing that the data is going to get submitted, that the is going to get submitted to Vera by July, we expect that process to, it's hard to know exactly, but like a few months at least. And so whether we've already pre-sold the credits or not, or then we have to start selling them when they are minted, probably like Q3, Q4 next year, or Q4, I think it would be realistic to say that the carbon revenue from this ingestion cycle, which is your 21 to 2023 food rescue data, may come in Q4 of 25 or Q1 of 26. It's unfortunate, but we are reliant on the review schedules of the auditors and Vera. We are reliant on their timelines, and so I think that's very realistic, and I want to be as transparent as possible. Could you help understanding the approach that Brightly adopts on evaluating the food recovery that is made converted to carbon credits?
I think he means like watermelon is the least
Okay.
impactful versus, an apple.
Right. So we, and I mean this, we are as conservative in our calculations and assumptions as possible. Again, if we aren't clear on what the food type is or any other question within your data, we are going to go as conservative as possible to never overestimate the environmental impact of your food rescue efforts. If you have a conversation with a carbon credit project developer and the numbers seem too good and too real, that's what you want to look into. How are you calculating this, and what are your assumptions that you're making within your calculation model? While that means we are probably generating not as many carbon credits as we potentially could, what it means is that because we are of high integrity, it is going to allow, that is what companies are starting to look for more and more. They want to avoid greenwashing. So in fact, while we may be producing fewer carbon credits, the additional value we're going to be able to charge for these carbon credits is going to make up for the difference. So without getting too far into the weeds, I'm happy to dig into that calculation model more with any of you all. Just we are what the voluntary carbon market considers to be high integrity.
We are about out of time, Matt. If you would just want to take that next question, and then we'll have to cut it off and refer folks to email.
Grant, absolutely. And everybody, feel free to just shoot me an email and we'll set up a call. What percent of your proposed credits have been denied by Vera? None. So we're in these final stages now, and it feels like weeks, maybe a few months away. But nothing has been denied. We are closing out that third-party audit. They were just at a few of our FRO partners' sites doing on-site audits. We think it went really well. They had we're working with them on what their feedback is, and to be honest, it isn't anything about our calculations or their work. It's kind of like our own internal formatting of this project, which is good. So nothing has been denied by Vera. Sorry, to get back to answering your question. But they will have a decision on the carbon credits that we can generate per pound of food rescued, and they will determine whether our estimations are in line with their methodology. We believe they should be. We've taken a very, very thoughtful approach, but at the end of the day, they're the overseeing agency and they'll tell us what we can do. And that's the voluntary carbon market.
Matt, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for your enthusiastic participation, all of your great questions. I mean, these are a lot of the same questions that I've been asking Matt, and our team has been asking to really kind of dig down into this. I have dropped his email into the chat, so please feel free to follow up with him if you have more questions. If you have questions for Food Rescue Hero, there's a link in there for that. And then I encourage you to join us for our final 2024 webinar. I can't believe we're at the end of the year and we're at December. In just a few weeks in mid-December, we'll be looking at trends from 2024, and we'll be looking at 2025 if we can bear to look at 2025. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. Lovely to see you all. And thank you again, Matt, for your participation. This was great.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you all. Look forward to following up.
I think I learned something new from you every time we talk, Matt.
Me too. I'm just making stuff up as we go.
Aren't we all? That is the secret to adulthood, right? Is just winging it every day.
That's right. That's right.
All
Thank
right.
you, everybody. I appreciate you putting the time in here. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Bye.